All right, time to get into the next phase of the discussion about genomics. Beautiful food. Thank you very much for the lovely feed. I've got to say, it was killer. And we're going to look at some scenarios now and then sort of look at some of the stuff happening overseas. But Cris, maybe let's just look at one of the scenarios for Aotearoa.
Maybe if I start by being a little bit doom and gloom and say, what if we don't apply any leadership and investment to genomic medicine? What will happen? And I think the first thing to know is that the standard of care in medicine is defined internationally, not in New Zealand. And what patients demand is an international standard of care. That is continuing to increase the involvement of genomic medicine. But right now, if we don't do anything, a lot of our genomic medicine is funded by philanthropy and by research funding, small scale, very hard to sustain, often 3-year cycles. So we would need to get our genomic medicine supplied from overseas. We'd be sending tissues overseas, DNA overseas, or maybe having some genomic medicine here. But that's going to impact on competency. Our clinicians in particular, our pathology groups, our scientists aren't going to gain the competency they need to do genomic medicine well here. But most of all, of course, it's going to impact on patients, isn't it? The country will not be able to afford the genomic medicine we need from expensive overseas provision. We're going to be falling short of our duty of care to patients. And equity is going to be affected. We are going to increase the equity gap if we do nothing for Māori, Pacific people, disabled people, geographically isolated people. And of course, that's going to also lead to further failure of meeting our Te Tiriti Waitangi obligations. And at the same time, if we do nothing about insurance and the fact that unlike Australia and Canada and other places, our genomic medicine can be used by insurance companies in their underwriting decisions, that is going to cause further issues for patients. And then from the economic side, of course, we're not going to reap the benefits of a genomics industry, are we? We are going to really miss out, and we will be exporting the value from our genomics. And then finally for research, our best and brightest will probably go overseas. We won't have a genomic medicine infrastructure that fosters the genomic medicine for patients of tomorrow through research. And it's always cheaper to do medicine if you've been involved in developing the technology than if you have to buy it in. So that's a very doom and gloom scenario. I'd be interested in my Australian colleagues if they thought that was realistic. Maybe I'm a bit too doomy.
Yeah, I think it was important to put the negative case forward, obviously. Look, you know, it will happen one way or the other. My experience in the digital health program in Australia was I couldn't see a way where the health system wasn't going to become digitised. It was just a matter of how painful and expensive we wanted to make it to get there. So I think you will end up with the molecular era, you'll end up with genomics, but a lot of the things that you're describing won't be part of that future state. And I think some of that is very realistic. So maybe the opposite is where to go, is what does it mean to have a great framework and a strategy that creates collectivism and collaboration and partnerships and a better and broader understanding of genomics beyond medicine into economy and society and those elements. So maybe that's where we should go.
But is there an argument that, I mean, we're a small country, we've got a small health system, let you guys develop it, we'll fly over and just package it up and bring it back over here and implement it. You can spend lots of money discovering best practice, how to create patient-centric health systems and, you know, all the disruptive stuff, and we'll just sit on the edge and then we'll just harvest the good stuff.
Simon, you asked me this question in the prep and I gave you an answer. I'm going to give you the same one. If you do that, I will walk you past the graves of all the New Zealanders who die while we're stuffing around, and all the Australians who die while we're stuffing around. This is health, this is breakthrough technology, this is science. We have to move and we have to go with it. And as I said before, that if we do nothing, then the wealthy will take it up. They'll get on planes and boats and trains, and the rest of us will suffer. So yeah, so I think it's time to look at it as an opportunity. It's like daylight and it's like summer. I believe it's coming, we have to get ready.
Huti, Huti, I'll hand you the microphone. I've got one here as well. You can use two if you want.
Okay.
I'm intrigued. Paint us a scenario. Paint us a picture of the potential of genomics here in New Zealand.
Well, I think that, is this going all right? Yep. So I see genomic medicine as being business as usual across all health sectors. That's where it needs to go. I mean, right now we know that, there's a particular gene that 20% of our population in Ngāti Porou have that inhibits the uptake of metformin. We've known about this for 3 years. It's not being utilised, in healthcare. It hasn't been translated into healthcare yet. There are bottlenecks, and it's really frustrating to be engaged in this research. And our whānau are saying, so what's happening now? What's the update? And we're unable to say anything. There's actually no results being, seen at the coalface. So that's a real problem for us, and that's why I'm here tonight to talk about how we can actually accelerate that translation of research findings into healthcare as quickly as possible. Kia ora.
And if I can just follow up on that, I think that we have a precedent. We have the amazing COVID response with our incredible government in New Zealand side by side doing something that we thought was impossible. So we often have the argument that if you dive into genomics medicine, how can this possibly be a priority when we have so many other health issues in New Zealand? But I think we can probably be very sure that, like you say, genomics is coming. It's not if we do it. It's either going to come and increase inequities, or it's going to come and we're going to do it properly.
Yeah, and I think the interesting thing, there's the discipline that everybody in this room knows is health technology assessment, and in a sense, it's been certainly in Australia, and I can't speak for New Zealand, but in Australia it's been reduced to an analysis of cost effectiveness based primarily on overall survival. But that's never what it was meant to be. It came out in the 1970s, it came out of the Office of Technology Assessment in the US, as I understand it, and I'm no expert, and it was about assessing what happens when you introduce new technology into a society. What is the value of that new technology? And that's what we should be really focusing on. We know it's going to, and we got lost this morning talking for 2 hours about the ripple effects of genomic science, its impact on life insurance, its impact on superannuation, its impact on health insurance, the ripple effects that come down, whether or not there should be a genomics counsellor at multidisciplinary teams. All of these things are coming, and they all need to be assessed as part of the assessment of this technology and its value to society. And it will bring some challenges, and one of them is around data and privacy, but it's a big conversation, and when you can assess the value, then you can assess the worth. And I think that, we've just done a piece of work in Australia around the cost, the societal, and there is an economic cost around either losing a child or losing a parent prematurely when children are young, when their lives could either be extended or saved. And it's a dramatic impact. And, if I talk about it in personal terms, I can remember talking to a patient, and he'd been recently diagnosed, his wife was pregnant, and he said, I just want to walk my daughter to school. And because he ended up being tested, he had a genomic test, he had a mutation, he had lung cancer, and because he lived for 7 years, she remembers him, she knows him, he walked her to school. And that's priceless. And that's what we're trying to do when we talk about genomic science. It's not about anything else other than one dad and one little girl and the time that they can spend together.
So how, you guys are at a stage where you're ahead of the game. I've had a look. There's a lot of work being done. There's federal money, state money. It seems quite collaborative. There's lots of groups involved. There's private-public partnerships. what's the essence of the strategy, though? And if you know, go on, tell us, David. What are we going to do here to get some traction, to start a discussion, to get a team of people looking at this and make some people accountable?
So I think around 2014, there was a sort of a perfect storm forming, and the Melbourne Genomics Health Alliance was the first team out of the gates. That created an impetus for the National Health and Medical Research Council to fund the Australian Genomics Health Alliance, and they got started around the time that I started the Queensland Genomics Health Alliance. So this common thread started to ripple through the system. Not long after that, the government released their policy framework, but what they did, which was really clever, I thought, was they had an implementation plan that went alongside that. And that provided more than the niceties of the things that you need to say at a high level. And it presented an opportunity for groups who were starting to work together, who could demonstrate the collaborative activity, to start addressing those issues and to start to bring some timelines, some reality-based timelines to this. I don't want to, Richard's story is so powerful and I don't want to detract from that, but at the end of the day, if you can get a strategy that will help people be aligned. And I think the important bit there, and that we've talked about as a group, is this idea of the haves and the have-nots. When I did the genomics blueprint, the data blueprint work, and I worked with all of the health jurisdictions around Australia, some of the jurisdictions had bigger issues, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, equity issues in the Northern Territory. The big states were spending money because they had more money, they had economies of scale. And I was really worried that we were going to get a story of the groups that could manage the data and the groups that couldn't. And I thought that what we could do is to try and have a framework that narrowed that meant the groups that could innovate and be early adopters were not going to leave the rest behind. And the groups that were laggards, if you like, or that were struggling with other issues, they wouldn't be left behind. So it was more a maturity model, but it was a good example of something that, because we had a strategy, an implementation framework, we had collaborative capability, that people who proved they could work together, we could take a case to build something like the blueprint. And then my little team who did this work, we knew where all the people were to go and connect to them and start joining the dots and having all of their stories about the way the data could be managed and should be managed, and the bridge between data collected in the health system and data collected in the research system, and the opportunity that came with using that for public good.
Yeah, I just thought it might be useful to talk a little bit about the Omico model, because I don't know that it's unique, but it's different. But one of the challenges that Australia has, and I imagine it's the same, is that when a company, a pharmaceutical company, turns up into Australia, it might want to run a clinical trial, but it's going to have a heck of a time finding sufficient patients. And so in days gone by, it would have to go to a hospital in Sydney, and then go to a hospital in Melbourne, and then go to a hospital in Adelaide, and then go to a hospital in Perth, and get ethics approval, go through the whole process 7 or 8 times to try and get the patient population. And what Professor David Thomas, who by the way was going to be here tonight, and David and I can assure you, are very poor substitutes, no offence, but he conceived this model whereby it would be just one point of entry, which was Omico, and every, the top research institutes around the country, the top hospitals, cancer hospitals, would have signed up so that you could come and deal with one point of truth, if you like, get your trial approved, and it would go out and it would recruit across the country. And it's quite clear that either one of two ways. Either that would be essential in New Zealand because it's a smaller population, so therefore the problem of recruitment of specific targeted therapies, etc., is more obvious. But it's also, and that's what Cris is doing, has latched on to the Omico model and is running it here, which is a tremendously exciting thing. And I will defer to him to explain how that works and what it is. But despite the fact that we can't ever beat you at rugby, we can collaborate and we can make this happen.
You may be able to beat us at rugby now, I don't know. But I mean, for us, the Omico model is absolutely transformative. And as you say, when you're a country of small scale, it makes a big difference. And Michelle Wilson, Ben Lawrence, two oncologists with me supporting in the background, are running a sub-study of a trial called MOST. And the point of this is that for patients who have run out of a few options, no matter what their type of cancer, they have a chance to come into this. And no longer is their treatment being defined by a pathologist looking down the microscope. Rather, it's being defined by what is the mutation in their cells. But unfortunately, we're at the point where right now we are sending samples away to the US. And I'm fighting tooth and nail to get research funding so we can actually do the analysis here. So I'm not being negative at all, I'm extremely excited, but I also wanted to highlight the challenge right now that comes along with that in New Zealand.
If I can, it's a really interesting one because a great many patients are being sequenced by, it's a company called Foundation Medicine, and for the sake of Alex, it's a subsidiary of Roche, and it becomes an interesting question, and I don't want to divert the conversation, but where does the data end up in that conversation? And it ends up in a massive database based in the US. None of that is a bad thing, but we have, when I talk about having a conversation about it as a societal conversation, what we can look at on the side, if we contribute to a bigger global database, we're going to get faster, better access and more accurate access because we have a much bigger population. But that happens to be based in the US. How we think about ownership of our DNA and all of that comes into that. And then we think, well, maybe we shouldn't do that, which is Australia's position at the moment, by and large, that we would prefer to have that locked in an Australian database. Then we limit ourselves to, in our case, a 25 million gene pool. And they're really interesting questions that are emerging in how we think about and how we set up our genomics model. And to your point, Simon, we're no more advanced than you guys are on that.
But I think that illustrates 2 points. First of all, the fact that a lot of the genomic medicine is a collaboration with industry. We've collaborated a lot with with Roche, who have been very generous in helping us get these things off the ground, and with many other companies. It's never a bad thing to collaborate with industry, even though sometimes it's not a well understood model. The second thing is that we're finding that industry are allowing us to set the rules to an extent, and especially with the concept of Māori patients, genomic information going overseas can potentially lose te tiriti rights. We are finding that industry and medical journals and all sorts of groups overseas are absolutely accepting that that data can stay in New Zealand. So that is another reason to be very hopeful for generating a model in New Zealand.
I'll just say something about that model. So I think that, for our iwi, we were mandated, our whole order was mandated to look after and protect the data of our people. And so this is another bottleneck that we've identified, in the sense that we have had agreements, kaitiaki agreements. We've developed extra layers with the university to store our data there, our whānau's data there, but there has to be a long-term solution, and this is why a national framework is really essential. We can't do that forever. And of course, that data is stored with a trusted researcher, so that person's not going to live forever. So we need a long-term solution. Yeah.
So within this, we need cultural ambassadors, we need consumer advocacy, and this is something, David, you've worked with the Torres Strait program. Give us a little snippet of how that played out.
Yeah, so I would say, so I ran that 5-year program from start to go, or go to end. And when I reflect on the work that we did there, I loved our community advisory group. It was one line in a business plan. So when we got the $25 million, there was a business plan, it was about this thick, and it had one line. It said, do clinical demonstration projects and invest in capability and et cetera, at the same time, which was interesting. But then it said, and establish a community advisory group. I thought, cool, there's no other words in there, so let's see how far we can go. So we had a terrific community advisory group. We were able to partner with the kind of peak group, Health Consumers Queensland, and in fact, when I went to the CEO and said to her, would you be on our group? And she took it to their board and they said, no, this is really important to the future of the people we advocate for, so actually the chair of our board is going to be on your advisory group. And we had this amazing farmer from Bundaberg, and he had, everyone has these stories. And I've shared with you my story, and part of me being able to do that was the fact that I could work with this group, and I wasn't the CEO of that organisation. When I went in the room, I was just another person. So it was really powerful. One of the areas that we knew was important was culture and language diversity. So we ran projects around multilingual health workers to help them through those difficult conversations about hereditary genomics and genetics. And one of the most exciting projects, and this is where you say, oh, we're going to invest in research and clinical projects, etc. And I went to the Director General and said, would you let us fund patient-led projects? If this patient group can get to the point where they can put things on the table that they would like to do, and we'll work out how to support them and provide resources to do that. And so that was where we had a lot of really genuinely patient-led projects that were really important. And a big part of that was understanding what we do with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So inequity, diabolical. Very briefly, through the 3 rounds of funding, we advanced that through the initial set of work, which was just about re-engaging in the conversation about genomics and what it meant. And that was the starting point. And it was yarning, just having the conversation. The second iteration of that work was to start thinking about literacy. And I honestly feel really blessed to have had that experience and to learn what I learned through that about the importance of the artwork and what that meant to the local communities. Same words, technical stuff pushed into a frame for people to understand, but the local artwork and how important that was. And we did this amazing video, which somehow we'll work out how to share with you, Your Blood, Your Life. And then what we did is we then got to the point where we said, okay, what would a culturally appropriate clinical pathways look like into genetic health services? But if we hadn't started that foundation around a conversation that built trust and relationship with Aboriginal controlled medical services, and then go, how do we support literacy and understanding? And then how do we actually get to the point where we can go, this is what an appropriate clinical pathway looks like for these communities. That is not, once again, why genomics is different from health. It's not one rule that fits everyone. It's one that is about community. And as we were talking about the importance of consent and dynamic consent, that collectives and communities have a role in consent as well.
Right, we're going to have a break there, and just to recap there, I guess that illustrates the importance of co-design. No matter what's on the horizon, we have to really think carefully about, as you talked about literacy there, you talked about actually going out there and asking communities what they want and how they're going to use the information. And so, that's a challenge, isn't it? Co-design, it's a buzzword in the health industry, but not many people
co-design,
doing
co-production, yeah, we were sort of doing it, I didn't really realise, but I'll say one thing. If you do a research project, if you do a project, so all projects have outputs, and those outputs is somebody's outcome. If the people who are going to get that experience and have that outcome are not at the table, you're not doing translational research, you're just doing research.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, guys. We'll be back shortly. Enjoy your sweet stuff and have a glass. Thank you.